Daniel Morales hated airports. He hated the overhead announcements echoing like alarms, the suitcase wheels screeching on tile, the way everyone acted like flying was normal, like humans were meant to leave the ground and trust metal wings not to break. For him, stepping onto a plane always felt like volunteering for disaster. He was only 13, but fear made him feel younger, small enough to disappear behind his mother as they moved through Denver International's endless security lines. His mom, Alina, laughed nervously and told him again that this trip would help, that seeing his cousins in Colorado, getting a break from his routine, might ease the anxiety that had swallowed him over the last year. "You're stronger than you think, Danny," she whispered, squeezing his shoulder. He nodded like he believed her. He didn't. His therapist always said to focus on breathing when panic hit, control the air, control the fear, control the moment. But how could he trust air when he was about to be 30,000 feet above solid ground? At the gate, Daniel hugged his backpack to his chest, his Nintendo Switch inside, plus a flight simulator book he pretended was just a game guide. Nobody besides his mother knew he had spent half his childhood learning cockpit controls and emergency procedures before everything went wrong. Boarding began. His heart began to race. Flight 362, Denver to Seattle, a perfectly average flight on a perfectly average afternoon. No reason to panic, except Daniel always found one. A friendly flight attendant greeted them at the door. "Vacation?" she asked with a warm smile. Alina nodded. Daniel kept his head down. "Window seat for the brave one," the attendant said cheerfully, noticing where they were headed. Brave, Daniel almost laughed, if only she knew. He slid into his seat and buckled his belt tight, too tight. The interior smelled like citrus cleaner and recycled air. Overhead bins slammed shut like cell doors. Engines hummed outside, a sound that should be comforting but was. His vision tunneled for a moment. Breathe in, breathe out. His mother worriedly brushed a curl off his forehead. "You okay?" "I'm fine," he lied. Captain Hayes spoke through the intercom with a relaxed, confident tone. "Welcome aboard, folks. Clear skies, smooth ride. Sit back and enjoy." Passengers sighed with relief, the kind that only comes from complete trust in strangers behind locked doors. Daniel tried, really tried to believe it. The wheels lifted, the world fell away. As the plane climbed, the cabin lights dimmed. People settled into movies, headphones, snacks. Daniel tried to distract himself with his game, flying a virtual jet far safer than the real one he sat in. He kept glancing outside, where endless sky stretched like a trap wrapped in blue beauty. He whispered to himself, "Nothing is going to happen." But panic isn't logical. Panic is loud, impatient, and cruel. His seatbelt suddenly pressed hard against him as turbulence jolted the plane. Someone gasped down the aisle, but then it smoothed. Everyone laughed nervously. Daniel didn't. His mother squeezed his hand. "See, just bumps." But 30 minutes later, a different kind of jolt rattled through the aircraft, deeper, harsher. Not turbulence. The hum of the engines crackled, then dipped. Daniel felt it before anyone reacted. A shift in weight, a downward pull. His stomach dropped. "Mom," he choked. She opened her mouth to reassure him, but never got the words out. The cabin lights flickered. A high-pitched alarm wailed from somewhere beyond the cockpit door. The floor vibrated in sickening pulses. And then the world became terrifyingly silent. The engines, both engines, went quiet. No thrust, no roar, no heartbeat of the plane. Just the soft whistling of wind against a suddenly powerless aircraft hurtling through thin air. People froze, then the screaming began. Oxygen masks deployed with violent pops, whipping down like snakes from their hidden lairs. A drink cart overturned. A baby shrieked. A man swore loudly, hands shaking as he fumbled his mask on. Daniel couldn't breathe. Not because of altitude, because fear had wrapped its hand around his throat. His mom shoved a mask onto his face, securing it with trembling fingers. "It's okay, just breathe, look at me," she ordered, but her voice cracked. The intercom buzzed uselessly. No reassuring pilot voice, no calm instructions, nothing. The plane was descending too fast. Daniel saw numbers on a nearby screen, altitude dropping like a countdown clock. The aircraft shuddered violently. The wings tilted, causing passengers to slide against their belts, crying out. Somewhere up front, the cockpit door remained sealed, a place Daniel had never dared imagine entering, a place where his father once belonged. Captain Hayes was fighting controls not made to fly dead weight in thin air. His co-pilot repeated mayday calls, but static hissed back. They were crossing a dead radio zone, high mountains below, no ground control reachable. And the descent continued, faster, steeper. Daniel's chest tightened as a memory flashed. His father's voice, gentle and proud. "Call sign isn't just a name, kid, it's a promise. Mine for you, Bulls, because you always hit what matters." Daniel had hated that name since the accident, since the phone call, since his world broke and nothing felt safe ever again. He squeezed his eyes shut now. He didn't want to remember, not here, not while falling to his death. A flight attendant stumbled down the aisle, grabbing seatbacks to stay upright. "Brace positions," she yelled. "Everyone brace." Passengers screamed louder, chaos devouring the cabin. Daniel's fingers dug into the armrest, his breathing mask fogged with panic. He stared out the window, mountains rising like jagged knives beneath them, reaching for the doomed plane. His heart pounded like war drums in his ears. "We're not going to make it." Then something strange happened. One of the cockpit panels popped open, a silver case inside. Captain Hayes ripped it free, revealing a military-grade satellite emergency radio. Not standard equipment on civilian jets, something modified, something secret. His co-pilot tried again. "Mayday, mayday, engine failure, total power loss, request immediate vector." This time the device crackled. A stern, clipped voice answered through the static. "Unidentified aircraft, you are entering restricted airspace. State your pilot and call sign immediately." "Call sign?" "On a passenger jet." Hayes looked confused but answered anyway. "This is Captain Jonathan Hayes, Commercial Flight 362, civilian aircraft. We've lost both engines, we require." The voice cut him off. "Negative, our data shows a different pilot. Call sign Bulls. Identify now." Hayes froze. "Bullseye." Daniel felt cold flash through his veins. Passengers were panicking, but Daniel heard only those words pounding through his skull. "Bullseye. Bullseye. Bullseye." His mother went pale. "Danny," she whispered like she already knew the truth he tried so hard to bury. How could they know that name? His father's call sign, the one he teased Daniel would inherit. A secret between them. A secret military networks shouldn't have. Hayes repeated more urgently, "We have no pilot by that designation. Repeat, no bullseye here." The voice grew harsher. "Unauthorized flight path detected. You have armed escort. Cooperate or be engaged." Daniel's blood turned to ice. Armed escort meant fighters. Missiles. Death from the sky chasing death in the sky. He swallowed hard, hands trembling so violently he nearly tore the mask from his face. His mother's tears streaked silently as she held him tight. Below them, mountains. Above them, jets with weapons locked. Inside them, confusion and fear spiraling out of control. Daniel looked around, realizing there were no adults who understood what was really happening. No one who recognized that strange military command. No one prepared to give the answer the voice demanded. Except him. His voice shook, but he said it anyway. I'm Bullseye. His mother's scream was swallowed by the roaring silence inside Daniel's mind. Everyone around him stared, confused, terrified, while the emergency radio continued crackling, the unknown commander waiting. Two F-22 Raptors streaked past the windows, close enough for Daniel to see the pilots' helmets turn toward him. No one believed the nightmare could get worse. But it wasn't over. It was only beginning. As the powerless jet kept falling, the fighters armed their missiles, alarms kept screaming. The powerless aircraft dropped through the sky like something wounded, struggling against gravity and losing. The captain and co-pilot worked furiously, flicking switches, resetting systems, running checklists no crew ever wants to touch. Nothing responded. The jet was gliding, but terribly, its descent angle far too steep. Passengers clutched each other, the cabin a chaos of crying children, prayers whispered through sobs, someone shouting to fix the damn plane. As if anger could restore engines. The plane rolled slightly left and the floor tilted again, sending a bag sliding down the aisle like a runaway bullet. Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears. His voice, that one sentence, I'm Bullseye, still echoed inside him like betrayal. As if speaking it out loud tore open a door he had tried to lock shut since the night the Air Force car pulled up outside their home. His mother grabbed his shoulders. Don't ever say that again, she hissed, shaking with fear and fury. That wasn't your name, that was your father's, you are not. A sharp crackle interrupted her. Bullseye, respond immediately. It wasn't a request. On the wing, two F-22 Raptors appeared, sleek, gray predators carving through the wind. They kept frighteningly close to the falling jet, formation perfect despite the turbulence. Daniel could see the insignia, the pilots' helmets reflecting flashes of red warning lights. Passengers gasped and pointed, recognition that things were far worse than they seemed. They're going to shoot us down, someone whimpered. The captain unbuckled and stood in the aisle for the briefest moment, steadying himself as the floor shook violently again. Everyone stay calm. We are in communication with the United States Air Force, he called out, but his voice cracked on the last word. He didn't sound calm. He sounded terrified. Daniel couldn't take his eyes off the fighters outside. Jets built for war, now watching a plane full of families and tourists and ordinary people who had boarded with dreams of normal days. Not this. His mother's hand shook as she cupped his face. Listen to me. You don't know anything about any of this. Keep quiet. Let the pilots handle it. But Daniel did know something, too much. His father had made sure of it. Late nights with classified manuals hidden under the couch. Secret visits to simulators on base, emergency gliding drills on computer programs treated like video games. All because his father had whispered, "One day, you might be the only one who can help." He never understood what that meant, not until now. The captain disappeared back into the cockpit, the door slamming like a prison gate. Inside, he snatched up the radio. "This is Captain Hayes. I repeat, this is a civilian flight with 187 souls on board. We've lost both engines and require immediate assistance." Static, then the same cold voice. "Our system shows this aircraft was modified under Operation Night Market. Classified. We need authentication from Bullseye. Without it, you will be considered hostile." "Hostile?" Hayes barked into the mic. "We have women and children, how?" Again he was cut off. "Authenticate or prepare to be intercepted." Intercepted, everyone knew what that meant. The co-pilot shook his head in disbelief. How the hell does a... He didn't finish. The altimeter screamed, descent past 20,000 feet and dropping fast. Hayes cursed and pressed his forehead to the controls for 1 second, eyes squeezed shut. Then he turned and stared at Daniel through the open cockpit door, as if he could feel the boy's presence, as if the answers were sitting out there in a trembling, terrified 13-year-old. Elena saw the look, she knew. No, she snapped louder than she meant to. He is a child. He is not part of your world. He is not responsible for this, do you understand? But the captain wasn't listening, or couldn't. They were out of time and out of altitude. He stepped into the aisle again. Who said bulls? His voice shook. The plane lurched downward sharply. Several people screamed as cups and phones flew through the air. Hayes grabbed a headrest to keep from falling onto a terrified passenger. Daniel raised his hand slightly, barely, but enough. The captain stared, disbelieving. You, he breathed. He doesn't know anything, Alina insisted, pulling Daniel into her arms. But Daniel pushed her hands away, gently. His fingers were trembling. His heart felt like a trapped bird trying to escape his chest. I know more than I should, he whispered. A violent tremor ripped through the structure, metal groaning under stress. The descent became harsher. Daniel felt his stomach rising into his throat, weightlessness before another slam downward. Hayes dragged him toward the cockpit. Alina grabbed Daniel's arm, fighting as if she could stop gravity itself. No, she cried, you cannot ask this of him. Ma'am, with respect, Hayes' voice was broken. If he can help us, any of us, I have to try. They disappeared inside. The door shut again. Alina's scream cut off. Inside the cockpit, Daniel could barely breathe. The view out the windshield was nauseating, mountains and trees growing bigger by the second. Red warnings flashed everywhere. The panels buzzed with faults. Engine fail, hydraulics limited, airspeed low, stall warning, and averaging none of them. The co-pilot thrust a spare headset onto Daniel. If you know anything real, now's the time. Daniel wiped his palms on his jeans. His voice wavered as he pressed the comm switch. Hello. Silence, the world waited. Then the fighter commander replied, a lower human voice this time. Identify. Daniel's throat tightened. For a moment he was a scared kid again. But then he saw his father's flight patch pinned to his backpack, frayed at the edges. He took a breath like his dad had taught him, deep, controlled, brave. I am Bullseye, he said, son of Lieutenant David Morales. The cockpit fell quiet. The static on the radio seemed to hold its breath. Then, Morales. The tone changed, shock replacing ice. A long beat. The F-22 pilot whispered something off mic, then came back clearer. Bulls, your father saved my life. Daniel blinked, heart slamming harder. He hadn't expected that. He didn't know what to say. But there was no time to be stunned. Hayes pointed frantically to the screens. 17,000 feet. 16,500. 16,000. Ground rising fast. We need glide vectors. Emergency landing route. Daniel called into the mic, trying to sound like a pilot and not a child on the brink of panic. The F-22 commander responded quickly now, urgency replacing suspicion. Okay, kid, hang tight. We're getting you a window. Out the cockpit window, the Raptors dipped lower, forming a guidance pattern. For the first time since the engines failed, there was a plan. But survival remained a thin, shaking thread. The co-pilot tried emergency restart sequences. Nothing. Hayes wiped sweat from his hairline. Controls are mushy. We need every spare hand, even if those hands are tiny. Daniel slid forward into the co-pilot's seat, a place that didn't belong to him. His fingers hovered over controls he'd only ever touched in simulations and toy replicas. I can help, he said again, louder this time. His voice was still shaking, but now it carried something new. Determination. Below, black cliffs waited for them like open jaws. Above, two raptors guarded them like wolves, refusing to let their pack fall. Inside, 187 terrified souls watched a boy begin to do something impossible. Breathe in. Breathe out. Control the air, control the fear, control the moment. Daniel set his hands on the yoke. He wasn't ready. He had no choice. And the plane was still falling. Daniel's hands clutched the yoke like it might bite him. Every instinct screamed he didn't belong there. A nervous 13-year-old pretending to be someone who had earned wings through years of training and courage. But fear had no patience for his age. Fear demanded action. Hayes leaned next to him, voice tight. "We're going too fast. Reduce descent rate or we'll tear apart." The co-pilot pressed buttons furiously, trying restart sequences, fuel line bypasses, anything. But each response from the systems flashed failure in angry red. The powerless jet groaned again, shuddering downward like a roller coaster with no tracks. The radio crackled. "Bullseye, Raptors are vectoring you to a flat valley ahead, but you have to keep the nose up or you won't make the ridge." Daniel nodded, even though the pilot couldn't see him. His hands were sweating so badly the yoke almost slipped. He remembered one of the first rules his father drilled into him. Airplanes don't fall, pilots let them. The nose needed lifting, but pulling back too much would stall them into a fatal dive. He steadied his breath. 1, 2, 3. The plane responded barely, the descent angle easing from catastrophic to just terrifying. Passengers felt it. Screams softened into whimpers, a fragile thread of hope whispering through the cabin. Hayes stared at Daniel, stunned. "Where did you learn that?" Daniel kept his eyes forward. "Simulators, my dad. He taught me everything he could." The co-pilot turned slowly, recognition widening his eyes. "Morales, the Morales." Daniel swallowed. "Yeah." Silence held the cockpit like gravity itself. Everyone in the Air Force knew Lieutenant David Morales, the pilot who chose to take a burning jet down with him rather than eject over a populated neighborhood. He was the man who became a legend in the exact moment he died. And now his son was sitting in a doomed cockpit with his father's ghost in his hands. The intercom crackled again, the F-22 commander voice lower. "Bulls, you shouldn't be there, but right now you're all they've got, and you're doing good, kid." His father had said that too. "You're doing good, son." A flash of pain stabbed his chest. He blinked hard, couldn't break, not now. The altimeter numbers kept spinning down. 14,000 feet, 13,500, 13,000. "Terrain coming up far too fast," the co-pilot muttered. Captain Hayes scanned for anything, any sign of power returning. "We need to try a restart again," he said. "One more time." Daniel nodded. "I'll hold her steady." His voice cracked, but his grip stayed firm. Hayes initiated the engine restart sequence. The cockpit filled with whirs, clicks, hydraulic groans. Everyone waited. Waited. For a miracle. Nothing. Then a pipe, a cough. Every head snapped up. One engine fan spun slowly, painfully, then stopped again. The tiny flicker of hope smothered instantly. Hayes punched the throttle in rage. "Come on." Nothing. Daniel's lungs burned. His mask felt too tight. "Control the air." But he was losing it. Panic crawled up his throat like smoke. He looked out the window, the valley inching closer, surrounded by mountains that looked like knives aimed at their falling bellies. His mother's voice through the cockpit door. "Danny, I'm right here." He almost turned, almost broke. He forced his eyes forward. "Raptors are still with us," the co-pilot said, nodding toward the right wing. One F-22 flew so close Daniel could see the pilot's eyes behind the visor, calm, steady, certain. "Bullseye, do not give up," the pilot said. "Your dad wouldn't." 12,000 feet. 11,500. 11,000. Time was draining like sand through fingers. The Raptor's commander spoke again. "Listen carefully. There's something you need to know about your father." Daniel stiffened. "He didn't die in that crash." Hayes blinked. The co-pilot froze. Daniel's heart stopped. The voice continued. "He ejected, But what he saved that day wasn't just a neighborhood. It was the prototype for this aircraft's secret modifications. Hayes turned sharply. What modifications? Before the pilot could answer, something on the right wing moved. A panel popped open by itself. Inside, a dark, round device glowing with faint blue circuitry. Hayes, the co-pilot stammered. That's not normal. More panels opened across both wings, mechanical flowers blooming in a pattern Daniel didn't recognize. The aircraft's body hummed with new life, like waking up from a long sleep. The Raptors reacted instantly, pulling back, weapons armed. "Stand down," the commander shouted. "Deactivate shadow systems immediately." Shadow systems. Operation Night Market. The modification that turned a harmless passenger jet into a military target. Daniel's head spun. What's happening? Hayes grabbed the manual override panel. We never trained on anything like this. Why would a commercial jet have? A warning burst across every screen. Shadow mode engaged. Remote protocol active. Override D&ID. The co-pilot's face drained. Someone else has control. Then a new voice, female, precise, chilling, broadcast through the cockpit. "Bullseye, you have inherited your father's mission. Guidance uploaded. You will proceed with Operation Night Market." Hayes shouted into the mic. "Who is this? We need emergency landing vectors now. We don't have the altitude for." "Negative. The aircraft is remotely prioritized. Continue course." "Continue course," Hayes raged. "We're about to crash." The plane jolted violently, the yoke yanked forward by unseen force. Daniel gasped. Hayes and the co-pilot struggled, but the controls fought them, overridden by the hidden system. The jet suddenly angled toward the mountains, toward a ridge that was far too high to clear. Passengers screamed as the cabin tilted. Luggage flew. A flight attendant slammed into seats, crying out. Daniel's knuckles whitened around the yoke. "It's trying to kill us." "No," the unknown woman said, voice unshakable. "It is trying to complete its mission." Daniel's stomach twisted. His mind raced. His father's final day. The secret he died or disappeared protecting. A child being targeted now because of a call sign. Why? The Raptor's commander screamed over the radio. "Bullseye, pull up now. You're on collision course." Daniel yanked back on the yoke with everything he had. Hayes and the co-pilot joined him, 3 sets of hands against a machine bigger than any of them. The mountains grew massive, a wall of rock filling the windshield. Daniel's breathing turned to frantic gasps. "Control the air." There was no control. The plane screamed downward. 1,000 feet. 800. 600. Wind howled over the nose, the ridge rising like a giant ready to slice the plane open. His mother's muffled voice. "Danny, please." He squeezed his eyes shut. His father's voice echoed. "Bullseye, you always hit what matters." The co-pilot yelled. "We're not going to clear it." The cabin lights flickered again, bathing the terrified passengers in pulses of dim orange glow. A few people screamed every time the plane shook, a reminder that gravity wanted to finish what the engines had started. A mother clutched her toddler against her chest, whispering prayers into his tiny ear. An elderly couple held hands, wedding rings trembling. Somewhere near the back, a businessman was desperately sending messages into his phone, even though he knew there was no signal this high. Panic wanted to take control. It wanted to swallow every heart on board. But in the cockpit, someone refused to let fear decide the outcome. It wasn't the captain. It wasn't the co-pilot. It wasn't anyone trained or paid to be here. It was a 12-year-old girl. Emily's small hands were planted on the yoke, knuckles pale. She gulped for breath, her mind racing. Altitude dropping, controls heavy, nose too low. She wasn't a pilot, not fully. She only flew in the simulator her father used at the airbase. And he was gone now, years gone, but she could hear his voice clearer than ever. Aviators aren't fearless, Em. We act in spite of fear. Her spine straightened. She pulled slightly back on the yoke, trying to steady the descent. The plane stopped shaking as violently, but they were still falling. The radio sputtered again, filled with military voices. Civilian aircraft, identify immediately. State your emergency. Static. Then faint but unmistakable, her own voice crackled back across the channel. Shadow Fox requesting vectors to nearest runway, engines failed. Need assistance, please. She caught her breath. She almost said her father's call sign. Shadow Fox used to be his name, and hers only when she played pretend in the hangar. She wasn't supposed to use it, but habit and panic had betrayed her. On the other end of the radio, silence swallowed every word. Inside two F-22 cockpits, the pilots were hit by a shock neither turbulence nor combat had ever caused. Major Walker froze with his hand still hovering above the throttle. Captain Rivera felt a chill slip under his uniform collar. Shadow Fox. That wasn't just any call sign. That was a ghost rising from a grave the Air Force never forgot. Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Carter, missing in a classified mission 5 years earlier. A hero never recovered. A legend sealed in silence. And now a child was saying his name. Walker forced his voice steady. Shadow Fox, please confirm. Identify yourself. Emily trembled but answered. Emily Carter, my dad, he. She couldn't finish, not now. Rivera's heartbeat kicked against his ribs. He whispered into his mic. That's his kid. Walker finally snapped into motion. Civilian aircraft, Emily, we're here to help. We're going to bring you home. Emily swallowed a swelling wave of relief, but the moment broke when she looked down at the control panel again. Warning lights glared at her like angry red eyes. Altitude ticking down. 33,000 feet. 32,200. 31,900. The jet was gliding, but it wouldn't glide forever. Behind her in the cabin, a flight attendant stumbled into the cockpit doorway. Her uniform was stained with spilled coffee and panic, mascara streaking her cheeks. She stared at the sight before her, a child in the pilot's seat, and her voice broke. Sweetheart, please come back with me. You shouldn't. Emily shook her head sharply. I can't leave. Nobody else knows how to fly this. The attendant covered her trembling mouth, tears spilling, realizing the truth. There was no one else. The captain and co-pilot were unconscious on the floor behind her, both victims of a sudden pressure loss event no one had understood yet. Oxygen masks dangled uselessly where they had fallen. Emily wasn't the best option. She was the only one. Focus, Em, she whispered to herself. Just like the simulator. Outside the cockpit, the escorting Raptor fighters tightened formation. The sun glinted sharp across their wings, sleek silver guardians slicing through clouds. Walker spoke again. Emily, what's your airspeed? She scanned, found the dial, voice shaky. 250 knots, descending fast. You're doing great, just keep the nose slightly up. Don't let her stall. The praise steadied her. She nodded, though no one could see it. Passengers leaned forward, clinging to every vibration in the metal around them. Some prayed silently. Some prayed loudly. A few stared at the door to the cockpit, listening to the tiny voice that had suddenly become the heartbeat of the aircraft. Rivera toggled the command channel. Emergency across regional airfields. Clear all runways. Get medical on standby. Control responded with urgency. Roger, diverting commercial traffic now. Tell them they've got priority. Emily listened as grown men in command centers rearranged the sky for her. For a moment, that pressure felt like it might crush her. What if I ruin this? What if I get everyone killed? Her breathing hitched, her vision blurred, panic clawed up her throat. She almost let go. But then, a whisper in her memory. Her father again. Soft, steady. Courage isn't loud, Em. It's the quiet voice that says, try again. She took one long, shaky breath. Her pulse steadied. Hands tightened. Emily Carter reset her shoulders and locked her eyes on the sky ahead. Walker's calm voice pulled her back into the moment. You're a Carter. Carter's finished the mission. She didn't know how he knew that, but the words hit her like fuel to an engine. The clouds thinned below. The ground, once a distant painting, now grew closer, sharper, ominously real. They needed power soon, any power. Wind alone wouldn't save them. Walker, Rivera said, anxiety creeping in. She needs an airport in 3 minutes or less, or we're losing lift. Walker scanned his map. The nearest runway was still too far. They were running out of Miracle. Emily checked the altimeter again, and her heart stuttered. 26,000 feet. Dropping faster. The internal battery, powering the avionics, flickered. Screens dimmed. Electric whines filled the cockpit. Emily's voice cracked. Major Walker, I don't know if we're gonna make it. The F-22 pilots exchanged a grim look. They both knew what she didn't: glide ratios, terrain below, loss of control as air thinned. Physics wasn't interested in heroism. Then suddenly, a sound. A cough. A sputter. One of the dead engines lurched, just slightly, like something deep inside was trying to breathe again. Emily gasped, eyes wide. Engine 2, it's... Walker leaned closer to his mic, voice razor-focused. Emily, listen very carefully. If that engine catches, even for a few seconds, you need to be ready to. But they never heard what came next. A sharp alarm screamed through the cockpit, louder than before. Red lights flared everywhere. Then, the nose dropped hard. Gravity yanked them downward. Passengers were lifted from their seats. Screams tore through the cabin. Emily slammed forward against the harness she had barely latched earlier. Her hands scrambled for control. But the yoke wouldn't move. Something was mechanically wrong. The plane wasn't gliding anymore. It was diving. Major Walker's voice snapped. Urgent, cracking with fear. Emily, pull up now. But the aircraft didn't respond. They were falling through the sky. Out of time. Out of luck. And everyone knew it. Emily Carter's knuckles burned white against the yoke. The plane shuddered violently, twisting like a wounded animal through the sky. Her chest heaved under the weight of fear, adrenaline, and an impossible responsibility. Behind her, the co-pilot groaned, consciousness flickering, while Captain Hayes gripped the panel like it might vanish at any moment. The altimeter spun downward. 22000, 21,500, 21,000 feet. Below them, mountains rose like jagged teeth reaching for the doomed fuselage. Every second brought the terrifying possibility that they would collide with rock instead of air. Emily swallowed. Breathe, breathe. She thought of her father's words she had buried after the accident. Bullseye, you always hit what matters. She wasn't a bullseye. She wasn't even supposed to be here. And yet right now, everyone's lives rested in her hands. The Raptor pilots flew close on either side, wings glinting in the afternoon sun, engines roaring warnings she could feel in her chest. Major Walker's voice broke through the radio. Emily, focus. You've got this, just keep her steady, the valley coming up. Emily's heart pounded, sweat stinging her eyes. She gritted her teeth and pulled back slightly on the yoke, trying to stabilize the nose. The jet responded barely, but it was enough to keep the fuselage from smashing into the cliffs below. Captain Hayes spoke through gritted teeth, voice trembling. Emily, can you reroute the thrust vector? I mean manual override. You know your dad taught you, right? Emily froze. The cockpit controls were unfamiliar. She had only ever practiced on simulators, on screens, with no real stakes. Yet now, the safety of 187 souls and the remnants of her father's secret mission depended on her. I think so," she whispered. Her fingers hovered above a panel filled with buttons and switches that seemed to glow like something alive. "This is it," she thought. "Do it or die trying." She remembered her father's drills, how to bypass failing engines, reroute hydraulic pressure, and manipulate emergency thrust, all critical if both engines were lost. Her fingers found the first sequence and pressed. The cockpit lit up in small bursts of orange and blue. The jet groaned as if awakening. The Raptor pilots reacted instantly. They had been poised for engagement, but now they held formation, following her desperate maneuvers. "Good, hold that vector. Yes, yes," Major Walker's voice roared. Emily focused, ignoring the screams and chaos behind her. She felt a strange clarity, a mix of terror, training, and determination. Below them, the terrain surged upward. Ridge after ridge of mountains, impossible and unforgiving, flashed past the windows. She calculated angles, descent speed, wind gusts. Every decision counted. Every second mattered. "Altitude check," Hayes barked. 16,000 feet, Emily replied, heart racing. The mountains were still climbing fast. The co-pilot, finally semi-conscious, whispered. "Engine 2, sputtering back." Emily's eyes widened. Could it really? She pushed forward cautiously on the throttle override and felt a low rumble beneath her. One engine tried to ignite, coughing sparks and smoke. The fuselage vibrated violently as the airframe responded. Passengers screamed in a mixture of panic and hope, not knowing what was happening but feeling the aircraft's new life. Emily's father's voice echoed in her mind. "Don't fight it, guide it. Control the air, control the fear." She yanked back on the yoke. The nose rose. The jet stabilized momentarily. But just as relief threatened to creep in, a violent tremor rocked the fuselage. The emergency warning lights blared. Hydraulic failure. Override required. Emily's stomach dropped. The co-pilot shouted, "We're losing control surfaces." The plane lurched left. Seats rattled. A suitcase slammed across the aisle, narrowly missing a screaming child. Hayes yelled, gripping the edge of the panel for support. Emily's hands shook violently, but she didn't let go. She had to make it through the next few moments, had to keep the nose up, had to keep them alive. The Raptors maneuvered overhead, scanning the mountains and mapping a path for her. Walker's voice came again. "Emily, adjust heading 15 degrees right, then glide vector 27. Prepare for low-altitude thrust assist." Emily nodded, mimicking what she saw on the panels. She toggled switches in a sequence she had memorized in her father's simulator. The engines roared louder, fighting against gravity and wind shear. Below, a valley appeared, a narrow ribbon of flat land surrounded by cliffs. If she could make it there was hope. But it was barely wide enough for the plane to touch down without disaster. "Hold it steady," Hayes screamed. "Keep it steady." Emily's vision narrowed. The valley grew. Wind buffeted the fuselage. Sparks flew as the landing gear indicators blinked red. Gear was not deploying. She cursed under her breath. The Raptors formed a protective V around them, flying low and signaling her path. Emily's fingers danced over the controls, rerouting power to hydraulics, stabilizing flaps manually. Her stomach twisted as the nose dipped again, perilously close to the cliffside. Passengers screamed as the aircraft leaned violently to the right. "Altitude," Hayes shouted. 9,500, 9,200, Emily gasped. She felt the valley rushing up. The ground threatened to devour them. Then something miraculous. Engine 2 stabilized. The jet hissed and groaned, responding just enough to give her control. Emily's hands flew across the yoke and panels, guiding the aircraft like a conductor guiding a symphony of chaos. The fuselage twisted and dipped, scraping past rock walls, sparks flying as undercarriage and wing panels grazed cliff edges. Sweat burned her eyes. Her mother's terrified voice echoed from the cabin. "Emily, please, you're going too." Emily ignored it. She focused on the instruments, the valley, the raptors, and the memory of her father. "Just a little further," she whispered. The valley widened slightly. Flat ground appeared. A stream of water glinted like glass. It would have to do. Hayes shouted over the roar. "Prepare for emergency landing. Brace positions." Emily nodded. She knew this was her only shot. She could make it or they would all die here. She guided the jet toward the center of the valley. Rocks passed by dangerously close. The aircraft screamed under the stress, but it held together. The Raptors hovered, signaling her final glide path. Emily pushed the throttle forward slightly, balancing the plane's fragile lift. Her stomach flipped as they neared the ground. The nose dipped. The fuselage threatened to pitch violently. And then, the first impact hit the plane, a jolt that threw everyone forward. Screams erupted, glass shattered. Emily gritted her teeth, holding the yoke. Sparks flew from the landing gear. The second impact hit. The plane skidded on gravel and dirt, dragging sparks along the valley. The third impact, and finally the aircraft slid to a stop. Silence. The valley lay still. Dust swirled in the air. Passengers gasped, crying, hugging each other. Emily's legs trembled. She slumped back in the seat, trying to catch her breath. Hayes whispered, shaking. "Kid, you did it." Emily's hands slowly released the yoke. She looked out the windshield at the valley around them, alive somehow. The Raptors hovered, engines idling. Walker's voice crackled. "Shadow Fox, you did it. You're alive." Emily stared at the sky. The impossible had happened. She had survived. But as the passengers cautiously unbuckled, looking at her with awe and disbelief, Emily knew one thing. This wasn't over. The mission her father had left her, the secrets in the plane, the military operation, the unknown forces guiding them were still out there. And now she was in it. Her heart pounded. She had done the impossible. But the real danger hadn't even begun. Emily Carter slumped back in the cockpit, trembling, her hands still gripping the yoke. The valley stretched out beneath them, deceptively calm now that the immediate crash had ended. Passengers were unbuckling cautiously, tears streaking faces, hands clutching loved ones, everyone slowly realizing they had survived. But Emily knew better. Survival was just the first battle. The cockpit was a mess of alarms, blinking red lights, and panels that refused to acknowledge standard protocols. The jet's shadow systems, the ones her father had warned her about in simulations, the ones nobody outside certain military channels knew existed, were still active. One wrong move and the plane could become more than just a glider. It could turn into a weapon. She exhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. The memory of her father's voice rang in her mind. "Bulls, every emergency has a rhythm. Listen to it. You can control the chaos." Emily realized she was Bullseye. She wasn't him. But right now she had to act like him. Captain Hayes leaned toward her, voice low but urgent. "Emily, we've survived the descent. That's incredible. But this plane, it's not just any aircraft. There's something inside it, something the military doesn't want anyone to know about. You said shadow systems are active." Emily nodded, swallowing hard. They were active the entire flight. That's why the F-22s locked on. That's why the engine failures weren't just accidents. Someone was controlling parts of the plane remotely. Hayes' face drained of color. "You're telling me this was a setup?" "I don't know," Emily admitted. Her voice shook. "But it wasn't random. The shadow systems weren't just experimental. They were armed. If the F-22 pilots hadn't recognized my call sign, they might have fired." Hayes' jaw tightened. "Fired?" Emily nodded. "I think they were ready, and they still are. The system could lock weapons if anyone tried to interfere. The co-pilot, finally regaining full consciousness, swallowed hard. I don't even want to imagine what kind of system this is, or why a civilian flight had it. Emily's stomach dropped. She didn't either. But one thing was clear. Her father had left her a responsibility she couldn't ignore. Outside, the F-22s hovered. Walker and Rivera's faces were hidden behind reflective visors, but Emily could feel the weight of their stare. These weren't just observers. They were guardians, waiting to see if the child who claimed the legendary call sign could handle the plane her father had left behind. Walker's voice finally cut through the radio, calm but sharp. "Shadow Fox, we need a status report. Confirm control of aircraft. Shadow systems active." Emily swallowed. "Yes, partially. The plane is stable for now, but I can't deactivate the systems without proper codes. My father, he left me instructions. I think they're inside the manual override panel." Rivera's voice softened. "You mean the same instructions you used to guide the plane to the valley?" "Yes," Emily whispered. "Everything he prepared, he left for me. He knew something like this could happen." The F-22s adjusted formation. Walker spoke again. "Emily, we're going to guide you through shutting this down. But you need to follow exactly what we say. One wrong move and shadow systems could engage weapons, or worse, destabilize the aircraft entirely." Emily nodded, gripping the yoke tighter. Her pulse raced. The entire jet was a ticking bomb, and she was the only person who could disarm it. Hayes muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. "This is insane. A child guiding a plane full of passengers through an experimental military system." Emily ignored him. Her focus was laser-sharp. She opened the manual override panel her father had left. Cables, switches, and buttons blinked like a miniature city of lights. She traced her father's handwriting on the small laminated card taped inside the panel. "Step 1, stabilize airflow. Step 2, bypass hydraulic control. Step 3, override shadow protocol." Emily's hands shook. Step 1, stabilize airflow, required precise yoke adjustments, balancing the plane against its own failing systems. 1 degree too much, and they could spin into the mountains again. She did it, slowly, carefully, feeling the vibrations of the aircraft beneath her fingers. The jet responded, humming almost in gratitude. "Good," Walker's voice came over the radio. "Now step 2, hydraulics." Emily's stomach twisted. She traced the cables, toggled the switches exactly as the instructions dictated. The plane shuddered violently, an angry, mechanical growl, then began to settle. Passengers looked around, unsure what had changed, but sensing the aircraft had grown steadier. "Step 3, she whispered, "override shadow protocol." Her hands hovered over the final sequence. Sweat poured down her face. She glanced at the Raptor's position, calculating the distance from mountain ridges, the angle of descent, the tension of the valley floor. "If I mess this up, everyone dies." She pressed the first button, the cockpit lit up. The second button, the lights dimmed, the third. A surge of power ran through the aircraft. Alarms silenced. Warning lights blinked out. The shadow systems deactivated. Emily exhaled a shaky breath, relief washing over her. "It's done," she whispered. Walker's voice, calm but tinged with awe, came over the radio. "Shadow Fox, that was incredible. Systems are offline. You just saved everyone again." Emily slumped back, tears streaming down her face. Relief, terror, and exhaustion all collided. She had guided a plane from death to safety. She had done what her father had trained her for, what no one else could have. But even as the adrenaline faded, a new realization hit her. Hayes leaned toward her. "Emily, the system, it's not gone forever. Someone activated it. We need to know who and why." Emily swallowed hard, looking at the valley below. The valley had saved them physically, but the truth still lay hidden somewhere. The people who wanted shadow systems active, the military forces who had tracked her call sign, and the secrets her father had died protecting. Outside, the Raptors remained close. Rivera's voice cut through the radio. "Emily, Shadow Fox, the flight path is secure for now, but we need you to land safely. Emergency teams are standing by. This isn't over." Emily nodded, still trembling. She had saved 187 lives, passengers who had no idea the child in the cockpit had just averted disaster. But she also knew she had stepped into a world far larger than her own, a world of secret programs, armed escorts, and unknown enemies. Hayes spoke again, voice low. "Emily, I don't know how you did this, but I do know something else. If your father is gone, part of him lives in you, and right now that part is enough." Emily didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the valley below, the flat strip of land that had been their salvation. She knew the moment of landing would test them again, but she also knew she could handle it. Because she had no choice. The shadow systems had been deactivated. The immediate danger was over. But the secrets of the plane and the mystery of who had triggered the system were still out there. And Emily Carter, the child who had inherited her father's call sign, was ready. For the first time, the valley felt like more than survival. It felt like the beginning of the fight. The valley stretched below like a fragile promise. Emily Carter's hands still shook from the shadow system's override, but she forced herself to focus. Every heartbeat, every tremor of the fuselage demanded total attention. The flat strip of ground ahead was barely wide enough to hold the jet. A miscalculation now would mean death for her, the passengers, and possibly even the Raptors hovering above. Captain Hayes leaned over, voice low but urgent. "Emily, the valley is your runway. You need to reduce speed, deploy landing gear manually, and hold her steady. Understand?" I understand," Emily whispered, though uncertainty clawed at her. The co-pilot, still pale and trembling, added, "We've never done anything like this. We're counting on you, kid, literally." Emily exhaled, gripping the yoke. Control the air, control the fear, control the moment. Her father's voice echoed again, almost like a mantra. "Bulls, you always hit what matters." She flicked the manual override switches for the landing gear. Hydraulic whines filled the cockpit as the gear struggled to extend. Sparks flew from the panels, and the jet shuddered violently, but finally, the landing gear clicked into place. "Gear down," Emily announced, voice cracking with relief. Hayes glanced at the altimeter. 8,000 feet, 7500 7,000. The valley's floor approached rapidly. Walker's voice came over the radio, tense but controlled. "Shadow Fox, line up perfectly. Keep the nose slightly up. Avoid skidding off the valley edges." Emily's eyes scanned the terrain. The flat stretch of earth was narrow and uneven, dotted with boulders and small ridges. Wind gusts swept through the valley like invisible knives. The jet's nose dipped dangerously as turbulence tossed it sideways. She yanked back on the yoke, feeling the fuselage groan in protest. Sparks flew as parts of the undercarriage scraped against protruding rocks. Panic threatened to overwhelm her. "Emily," Hayes barked, "stay calm, you're almost there." Her heart pounded in her chest. Sweat blurred her vision, but she focused on the instruments, airspeed, altitude, alignment, everything her father had drilled into her during secret simulator sessions. The first touch of the wheels scraped along gravel. The aircraft jolted violently. Passengers screamed, bodies lifted from their seats, and a few unsecured items flew across the cabin. Emily forced herself to keep the nose slightly elevated, guiding the jet as it skidded over rocks. Sparks flew from the landing gear and wing edges. The valley seemed impossibly short. Every meter counted. Hold it," Hayes shouted. The jet skidded, grinding gravel and earth beneath its belly. Emily felt a metallic taste in her mouth as the fuselage threatened to tip sideways. One wrong movement and they would roll into the cliff wall. Outside, the Raptors mirrored the maneuver, covering their sides like protective angels. Walker's voice was sharp and commanding. "Shadow Fox, keep her straight. You've got less than 200 meters." Emily's stomach turned. She could see the end of the valley approaching. The ground flattened slightly, giving her a sliver of hope. She applied the brakes carefully, guided the nose, and felt the friction slow the jet. The fuselage groaned one last time as the aircraft skidded to a stop, dust and gravel spraying in every direction. The valley held them. Silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then passengers erupted in shouts, some weeping, others laughing through relief. Emily slumped forward, shaking uncontrollably, hands still gripping the yoke. Hayes leaned back, finally allowing himself a long, ragged exhale. I can't believe it. You did it, kid. You actually did it." Emily closed her eyes, letting relief wash over her, but it was short-lived. Walker's voice came through, clipped and urgent. "Shadow Fox, this landing wasn't the end. The system activation wasn't accidental. Someone knew you'd be on this flight. Someone is out there watching." Emily froze. "What do you mean?" "Night market is active," Walker explained, voice low. "Shadow systems weren't just experimental, they're part of a larger operation. Weapons, surveillance, remote access. Whoever triggered it isn't finished, and they know who you are." Hayes' eyes widened. "Wait, you mean someone set this up, targeting a child?" Walker's tone was grim. "Not just a child, your father's legacy. Emily, this is bigger than anyone imagined." Emily's hands trembled, her heart still raced. She had survived the dive, the valley, the override. But now a new terror settled over her. She was a target. Behind her, passengers cautiously exited their seats, some hugging loved ones, still shaken but alive. She watched them and then turned back to the cockpit controls. She realized she wasn't finished. She needed answers. She needed to understand what her father had left behind, and who was responsible for putting shadow systems on a civilian flight. Hayes approached, still panting. "Emily, whatever this is, you need backup. We can't handle it alone." Emily shook her head. "I know, but I have to see this through. My dad, he trusted me with this. If I run now, they'll just keep coming." Rivera's voice came over the radio, calm but stern. "Shadow Fox will stay with you. But be aware, any move now could trigger another system activation. You're in a minefield." Emily nodded, swallowing her fear. She had survived falling from the sky. She could survive what came next. She opened the override panel again. The shadow system's interface blinked faintly, remnants of its power still alive. Emily traced her father's notes carefully, deciphering codes, bypassing security protocols. Suddenly, a warning flashed. "Remote access DTCTD." Emily's stomach dropped. Someone was still connected, watching, controlling. Walker's voice cut through. "Emily, they're still online. Whoever this is, they've maintained a link. You need to sever it now." Emily's hands flew over the controls, fingers moving faster than thought. She initiated a full system purge, isolating every trace of remote connection. The cockpit filled with warning chimes, sparks, and trembling panels. And then silence. The jet hummed quietly. Shadow systems were offline. Remote access gone. Emily exhaled, shaking but triumphant. She had not only survived but secured the plane. Walker's voice over the radio was filled with awe. "Shadow Fox, you did it. You actually did it. I've never seen anything like this in my life." Emily finally allowed herself a small, exhausted smile. Relief flooded her, but she knew the fight wasn't over. Somewhere out there, the people who had activated the system were still planning. Shadow systems had been defeated, for now, but Emily's journey was just beginning. She looked out at the valley, the passengers safely disembarking, and for the first time felt the weight of her father's legacy settle on her shoulders. She was no longer just a child, she was Shadow Fox. And the world would soon learn what that meant. The valley was quiet now, almost unreal in its calm. Dust swirled around the landing gear of the jet like a protective veil. Passengers stumbled out, hugging loved ones, weeping, laughing, a chaotic symphony of relief and disbelief. But Emily Carter remained seated in the cockpit, hands still gripping the yoke, staring at the instruments. The adrenaline had faded, leaving raw exhaustion and a new awareness. The mission wasn't over. Captain Hayes leaned against the panel, still shaking. "Emily, I don't even have words. You just did what no trained pilot could have done." Emily shook her head, voice low but firm. "I didn't do it alone. The Raptors, the override instructions, my dad." Hayes swallowed. "Your father, he left you a map through chaos most adults couldn't navigate. But Emily, the system being activated like that, someone planned this." Emily's stomach tightened. She had felt it, the remote connection, the lingering pulse of shadow systems. Someone had orchestrated the entire flight to test her, or maybe worse, to use her. Outside, the Raptors hovered, engines idling but eyes sharp. Walker's voice cut over the radio. "Shadow Fox, secure the passengers. We'll provide perimeter security. But understand this, activating shadow systems wasn't an accident. It was intentional, and whoever did it knows who you are." Emily's pulse spiked. She glanced at the valley's edge. Beyond it, thick forests and winding rivers hid secrets she couldn't yet see. The mountains that had once threatened to crush them now seemed to guard them, at least temporarily. The co-pilot, still pale, spoke. "So, what happens now? We've survived the dive, the valley, the system, but the people who set this up, they'll come after us, won't they?" Emily nodded. "Yes, and we need to be ready. My father, he prepared for something like this. The shadow systems, the overrides, even the call sign, it was all part of a larger plan." Hayes' brow furrowed. A plan that involved his kid flying a passenger jet into a valley. Emily's jaw tightened. Not just flying, controlling it, securing it, completing the mission he started. That's what the call sign meant. Bullseye, not just for precision in combat, but precision in life. Precision when the stakes are impossible. Outside, the passengers were moving cautiously toward emergency crews, but Emily barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the cockpit screens, analyzing every blinking light, every trace of shadow systems activity. Even deactivated, the jet remained a highly sensitive machine. One wrong move could bring it back to life. Walker's voice snapped through the radio again, commanding. "Shadow Fox, we need a secure extraction point. Emergency teams are in place, but we need you out of the cockpit now." Emily hesitated. She could leave, she was exhausted, she had survived. But instinctively, she knew leaving meant surrendering control, and surrendering control was something her father would never have allowed. Hayes leaned closer. "Emily, listen, you've done enough. Let the professionals handle extraction. You've earned a moment to breathe." Emily shook her head. "I can't, not yet. There's still a risk. Someone could try to remotely access the jet again. I need to make sure it's completely secure." Walker's voice softened, almost reluctantly respectful. "Shadow Fox, very well, but we're here, watching and ready to intervene. You're not alone." Emily exhaled, scanning the panels. She initiated a full diagnostic. Systems stabilized. Remote links severed. No active connections. The shadow systems had been neutralized, but the remnants remained like embers waiting to flare again. As she worked, her mind drifted to her father, the man who had disappeared 5 years ago during a classified mission, leaving only his legend behind. Emily had always felt his absence like a shadow, an unfinished chapter of her life. And now she understood. His disappearance, the secrets, the shadow systems, it had all led to this moment. A subtle vibration ran through the cockpit. Emily's heart skipped. She checked the instruments, nothing abnormal. She exhaled, forcing herself to relax. Then, a notification blinked on the main display. Unauthorized signal DETACTAD. ENCRYPTED communication initiated. Her stomach dropped. Someone else was trying again. But this time, Emily was ready. She traced the signal, fingers flying over the controls, isolating it, cutting it off. "Not today," she whispered. Outside, the Raptors adjusted formation, scanning the horizon. Walker's voice was clipped and precise. "Shadow Fox, is the system fully secure?" Emily nodded, hands trembling but steady. "Yes, no access, full override confirmed." A long silence followed. The only sounds were the wind, distant calls from emergency teams, and the faint hum of the jet. Then a familiar voice echoed over a secure channel. Soft, calm, unmistakable. "Bullseye." Emily froze. Her eyes widened. She recognized it immediately, her father. "Dad," she whispered, voice trembling. "Emily, you did well." The voice carried a weight of relief, pride, and something else, urgency. "I've been hiding, watching, preparing. There's no time to explain fully, but the people behind Night Market, they're still active. You need to trust no one, and you need to be ready." Emily's throat tightened. Tears burned her eyes. Why didn't you come back?" "I couldn't, not yet. The mission, it had to continue. Shadow systems, they were designed to protect the work we've done and to test you. You passed. You're ready now, and soon we'll finish what we started." Walker, overhearing the conversation, froze. Hayes' jaw dropped. Even the co-pilot paled. The F-22 pilots had been aware of her father's reputation, but this was beyond anything they had expected. Emily wiped her tears, voice steady despite the storm inside. "I'm ready, Dad. Tell me what to do." Her father's voice softened, almost a whisper now. "For now, survive. Protect the jet, protect the people. And remember, you're not just my daughter, you're Shadow Fox. That means something bigger than you can imagine, bigger than any of us." The valley below seemed to pulse with life, as if acknowledging the weight of her words. Passengers continued to move toward safety, oblivious to the monumental events they had just survived. Emily took a deep breath, letting the exhaustion and adrenaline mingle. She had survived a powerless jet falling from 9,000 meters. She had overpowered shadow systems, negotiated impossible maneuvers, and faced death without flinching. But most importantly, she had inherited her father's legacy. A responsibility, a mission, and the call sign that would now define her life. Outside, the Raptors hovered silently, guardians and witnesses to her triumph. Walker spoke, voice calm but tinged with awe. "Shadow Fox, welcome back. You've earned the name." Emily looked at the valley, the passengers, and the sky beyond. A quiet determination settled over her. She was no longer just a girl who had survived. She was a leader, a protector, a legacy carried forward. And as the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley floor, Emily Carter finally understood what it meant to be Shadow Fox. The name, the mission, and the weight of history itself. Somewhere out there, enemies still lurked. Secrets remained buried. Night Market had not ended, but Emily was ready. The legend of Shadow Fox, father and daughter, had only just begun. And the world would never forget her call sign. The end.